Good morning, everybody, from lovely Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to take you through the steps of how to make pizza from scratch, including sauce and the dough. So join me for the next 20-25 minutes and see how easy it is to make pizza at home that tastes great. So what you need for pizza sauce anyway, is Roma tomatoes. We live in Mexico, in Puerto Vallarta, and we have beautiful Roma tomatoes available at the market, which is just steps away from our condo. Available every day. We can buy a kilo, that's 2.2 pounds of Roma tomatoes for 18 pesos a kilo. So that's 2.2 pounds for approximately $1.20 Canadian. Anyway, I have tomatoes, I have some garlic, I have about a teaspoon and a half of salt, and some pretty good extra virgin olive oil. Yes, it is from Costco, but you know what? It is pretty good. So typically what you have to do, we wash all of our tomatoes as soon as we bring them back from the market. You need to blanch the tomatoes to get the skins off. So it's pretty simple to do that. You have to go over to the stove. I preheated some water here, as you can see. No salt, no nothing is required, so I'm just going to turn the stove on and get the tomatoes and basically plop them in. Careful you don't burn yourself. This is a little warm and I don't want to hurt my hands. Typically this takes about 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, depending on how tough the skins are and how ripe the tomatoes are. Since we moved here, I do this for all of our tomato sauces. This particular recipe is very similar to any kind of marinara sauce that I would make. So they're going to sit there, it's going to bubble up a bit, the skins are going to crack, and when you're going to do that, you're going to take them out of the hot water, and we have this nice little rack in our sink whereby I just put the tomatoes in until they cool, because it's kind of difficult to handle them when they're hot to get the skins off. I'm no Italian mama, so I can't do it with my bare hands. So for that amount of tomatoes, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tomatoes. I'll probably get 2 or 3 pizzas out of 7 tomatoes. The Roma tomatoes typically have a lot of pulp, less seeds. I leave the seeds in. I think you get health benefits by leaving the seeds in, but that is just my opinion. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to prepare the garlic, everybody's favorite thing to do. And as you can see, that's pretty simple. Came out pretty easy. So just chop the garlic. I'd like to chop it just fairly finely. If you chop it too fine, when you put it in the oil, it can burn a little quicker than if you leave some bigger bits. You're going to stew this down, so the garlic will soften and eventually even get smaller as you do so. I'm just going to take you over to the stove. So as you can see, I'm just going to turn the light on here. As you can see, it's starting to bubble up a bit. Not a lot happening with the tomatoes yet. They're at room temperature. They shouldn't take too long for the skins to crack. I'm going to push them around a bit with a spoon, see if there's any cracks on the other side. And there is not. As you can see, these are lovely red tomatoes. The tomatoes here just make the best sauces. It's like buying tomatoes in Palermo in Sicily, or in any of the markets in Florence or anywhere in Italy. Anyway, we will come back when these are ready to be. So what I'm going to do while the tomatoes are cooking away, oh, I didn't put my coat away. It's actually cold here in Mexico right now in the mornings. I go out to have my coffee and I have to wear my coat. I'm just going to go out and get a little bit of basil. I planted this basil. This one's not doing very well here. I planted this basil about 3 weeks ago, and as you can see, it's doing extremely well. Just gonna nip about that much off of fresh basil for the sauce itself. And it will sprout up from these nodules soon. Anyway, it's beautiful fresh basil. What are you doing out here, Hugo? Come on. For the sauce. You don't need a lot for the amount that we have, but that will make the pizza sauce taste beautiful. So while the tomatoes cook, what I'm going to do, because I have to do this early as well, I'm going to set the yeast for the pizza dough. So I'm just going to make one pizza. We have 2 pans, but I'm only making one. I'm going to put a teaspoon and a half of quick rise yeast. So this goes into warm water, anywhere from 100, I think, to 120 degrees Fahrenheit, which the yeast will start to work. I'm adding just a tidbit of sugar to the yeast. Sugar feeds yeast, so it activates it and it feeds off the yeast. And what I like to do is just stir it a little bit. My grandmother never did this, but I tend to because I find it activates a little bit better. So we just leave that. We're going to get back to the flour and mixing all the ingredients together for the dough after this, but we have to get this going at about the same time. Okay, so as you can see, the tomatoes have split. So what I'm going to do is going to shut down the gas, and I'm going to take them out and put them in this rack over here. I need a spoon for that. If they're really, really, really split, like this one, try to get as much water out of them as you can. There's the tomatoes, they gotta cool off, and then I'll peel them, and then we'll start cooking the sauce. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start the pizza dough. I use a pretty simple recipe. It's 2 1/4 cups of flour. This is a half cup flour measure, but I like it because it's very precise, so I use it even though I have to scoop out 5 measures of flour. This is the best flour I found in Mexico. It's called Selectica, Harina de Trigo. It's pretty fine, not as great as what we have in Canada, but it seems to work okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm only going to put 1 cup in to add the yeast once it has, well, it is proving. You can see the yeast is proving, or proofing, sorry. You see the bubbles on the yeast. It will continue to do so. You don't have to wait for it to bubble right up. You can actually start the dough now by adding these ingredients in here. So as I said, it's about 3/4 of a cup of warm water here with the yeast and the little bit of sugar. And I like to use a fork for this. Again, if you watch my bread recipe, I typically do it in the KitchenAid mixer, but for pizza, there's not so much there, so you don't have to worry so much about it. I just do it by hand. I'm going to put some salt in it. You do salt to taste for pizza dough. I usually use about 1.5 teaspoons for one pizza. Seems like a lot, but you gotta season your dough. Your dough, to me, your dough and your sauce is what makes your pizza. I'm just gonna mix that salt into the flour. And I'm gonna dump the yeast in and the water and mix it. One thing I do not like about this flour here in Mexico is that it's a small bag and you can't get your hands in it very well. So that's 1 1/2 cups of flour. I'm going to do it, stir it in about 1/4 cup at a time. Oops. You're not making bread unless you get flour on the floor. like to take the dough and smush it along the sides and get all the flour off so you don't get any bits. That's stirred in. Stir in the rest. And of course, as you get more and more flour introduced into the wet paste or bread dough, it gets harder and harder to mix. So I'm pretty much done with the fork here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start doing it by hand. So right now we're at 1 1/2 cups of flour to 3/4 cup of warm water with yeast and sugar. So I basically use my hand like a dough poke in this bowl to incorporate more of the flour into the paste. And you're gonna get stuck. It's just the pleasures of making bread, and I'm sorry for banging this on the counter. Granite counters and glass bowls are kind of annoying. Okay, just gonna clean off my hands, and I'm gonna add the rest of the flour. Pretty soon I'm gonna have to put this out on the bench and put some bench flour on and knead it down. See this? Don't worry about it. It'll come off after you start kneading the dough. Okay, so now we're at 2 cups flour. And that may or may not be enough. One thing that I do sometimes put into my pizza dough is some extra virgin olive oil. That makes it a little crispier, makes the dough softer. It probably adds some flavor too, I'm not sure. So here, we're getting to the point, so I know I'm not going to have to add any more flour to this. It's pretty dry because it's not humid here today, and this flour is not so old, so it's not going to soak in a lot of liquid like an older flour would. So see how easy it is to get the dough off once you start working with your hands? And the dough gets a bit dry, you just rub them together and it comes out. So I'm going to put some olive oil in this because it's a teeny bit dry. About 2 tablespoons. I'm going to work it in with my hands in the bowl, and then I'm going to turn this out onto the counter. The nice thing about putting oil in your bread dough is that it's less sticky. Okay, here we go. Okay, so this is at the point where we can turn it out. I like to use the dough just to get the bits off the side. So I've turned it out, and don't worry if you have this dry stuff. Once you start kneading it in, it will disappear. So it's very important to activate the glutens in your dough, always is. That's what makes a good bread, a good dough. I like to kind of form it like a pastry to get these little dry bits in, and then knead it a bit more. As you can see, those dry bits are starting to disappear, which is great. It's a good workout for your arm. If you've been to the gym, our gyms are now open here in Puerto Vallarta. They have been for about a month. Okay, so that's my dough. I'm going to set it back in the pan, clean my bench off a bit. Cover it with saran because you don't want the dough to crust, and just let time do the rest of the work for you. I will need this once more before I actually push it down into the pizza dough. This dough is heavy now. In about 2 hours, it's going to be nice and light. There'll be tons of air in it from the yeast. breaking down the glutens and making nice bubbles in the dough. You can put olive oil on top. You don't really need to if you put a layer of saran, because what's going to happen is the dough is going to sweat a bit, and you'll notice you'll get a little bit of humidity underneath the plastic. Okay, so the tomatoes have semi-cooled off. I'm just going to bring them over to cutting board. Here we go. So just take the stem off. These are still a little bit hot. In fact, they're still a lot bit hot. So I'm just taking the stem off. And as you can see, the skin just rolls off of them. So I think the pulp next to the skin has the most flavor. So if it comes off with the skin, I just scrape it off with the knife. I should have put these in for a little bit longer, but that's okay. Again, this seems to be something that a lot of people wouldn't take the time to do, but when you do your own tomatoes like this, and then compare it to a good, even a good quality canned tomato, like Muti or what's the other one? President's Choice in Canada actually has a really good canned tomato. San Marzanos, I particularly don't care for San Marzano. I think they sit on the shelf a long time and they get very tinny. But I prefer the Muti. If in a pinch I have to use a canned tomato, but you cannot beat this little process that I'm doing here to make a really good deep red tomato sauce. Okay, so now it's time to start cooking your tomatoes. Just go over to the stove, add about I would say 2 1/4 tablespoons of olive oil. I like to put the olive oil in a cold pan, start it, and I also like to start the garlic in cold olive oil. That way it gets a longer time to infuse. I'm sorry, it's hard to hold the camera and do this at the same time. I don't have a cameraman here today. It gives a longer time for the garlic to infuse into the oil. Just stir it around a bit. And once that starts to sizzle a bit, I'll bring the tomatoes over. Another thing that I like in my pizza sauce are chili flakes, peperoncino. We are so lucky to have so many different varieties of pepper flakes that we can buy in bulk at the local market, and even the grocery stores have them in big piles and bins. So as you can see, I don't know if you can hear that, but it's starting to sizzle nicely. So I'm going to turn it down. I'm on high right now. Just turn it down to low. I don't want my garlic to burn, as I said before. Okay, and it's cooking away, and you can see it's already starting to brown. So what I'm going to do now is start bringing the tomatoes over. Okay, well, we got the camera steady. I'm just over here at the work island, and I simply just start pushing the tomatoes in. No need to cut them. Oh, Hugo, it's the cat. He thinks somebody should be home right now who's not. Pushing them in one by one, making sure I don't start the wooden spoon on fire by hitting it into the gas flame. Okay, the rest of the juice is there. When you go through that work, you don't want to miss any of the tomato. Okay, that's pretty good. And away it cooks. Just stir it all up. I like to put a lid on for the first few minutes. That helps the tomatoes cook down. And we'll bring you back in a bit when these are all ready for the next step. So I put the lid on. Just gonna remove it. You can see it's cooking pretty fine here. Just gonna add the salt. And you may have to season this a bit later. Salt is to taste. I like my salt. I have low blood pressure and a good heart, so I'm lucky I can eat it. To me, salt is the seasoning to make a lot of things taste better. So just added the salt, and as you can see, I just take this wooden spatula and just break the tomatoes down a little bit, and they'll cook down themselves. I'm also gonna just take the basil. Oh, I didn't wash it. Wash it lightly and throw it in. Okay, so the sauce has been simmering, I would say approximately 30 minutes. And it looks pretty good. I like a chunky sauce on pizza, so I'm not really that concerned on, see some of these tomatoes have some chunks in it. To me, that gives them more depth of flavor, especially against the sort of bland crust. So it's almost ready. It's just got to cool down. And I usually use about a ladle and a quarter for one pizza, so I'll probably get 2 or 3 pizzas out of this. So the dough is almost risen, double, but I'm just getting the ingredients here. We have broccoli, jalapeno, red bell pepper, red onion. We have goat cheese and Parmigiano Reggiano. I don't like a lot of cheese on my pizza. I prefer a very thin crust with a little more sauce and some nice vegetables. A nice tart cheese or a stinky cheese, even blue cheese is really good on goat cheese. Pecorino is fantastic on pizza, but I don't have pecorino, so we only have Parmigiano. So that's it. Another really good pizza, my all-time favorite, is a margherita with buffalo mozzarella and fresh basil. But I don't have buffalo mozzarella today. Okay, so as you can see, the dough is nice and bulky. One thing about dough, especially when you're making with pizza, use bench flour to keep it from sticking, of course, like with any other bread. Sometimes dough's just stickier some days than it is others, so kind of got to judge that. When you punch down the dough, try not to work it so much. You want to keep it as aerated as possible, for lack of a better word. So I'm just going to dump it out on the board. And get some flour on my fingers. And I'm just going to lightly push it down. And you can, I don't know if you can hear it, but there's air coming out of it. When you work pizza dough, and if it's a little stiff, this is still a little stiff, it probably could have risen a little bit more. Punch it out as much as you can, but if you see it bouncing back, see how it's bouncing back there? Just let the dough rest for 10 minutes. The elasticity of the glutens will settle down and you'll be able to shape it a bit better. But always remember, if you're going to do this, cover it, because you do not want your dough to get a crust on it, because then you'll have a gnarly, cracked crust, and that's not the best. Be back in. So I've gone away for about 15 minutes, and I'm just going to push it down, and you can see the dough is now very pliable. Plop it on the pan. It's that easy. One thing I am going to show you, Parmigiano Reggiano is salty cheese. It's not as salty as Pecorino, but it's salty nonetheless. So what I like to do for this is use a microplane for the Parmigiano Reggiano. It makes a very fine grate, and you can control the cheese going on the pizza a little bit better because it is a bit salty. I have just lit the oven to 500 degrees or 230 Fahrenheit, or Celsius, sorry. And I just want to get my spoon sauce. This is the pre-cooked pizza. My oven is now preheated to over 500 actually. We have a pretty good stove here. It's a 6-burner, I love it, and it's got a huge oven. I'm just gonna throw it in the oven. Okay, so it's time to turn the pizza. It's been 6 minutes in the oven. As you can see, it is cooking lovely. As I said, the reason I cook this pizza, or turn this pizza, is that I have a hot spot in this oven. So the pizza's done. And I'm just going to take it out of the oven. Well, I have taken it out of the oven. Put it on the board. As you can see, it's steaming hot. It's a lovely cooked bottom. And I just got to let that cool. Time to cut. As you can see, a knife works beautifully for this. It cuts apart perfectly. So, this is my dinner, and probably all in 35 minutes actual bench time where I've been working to get this done. Just gonna pour myself a glass of wine and enjoy the lovely view here from our home in Puerto Vallarta. And salute.